We received this message from a listener a few days ago.
My business has grown to the point where I need to get some help, but I'm so confused about whether I need to hire an employee or if I can just pay them as a contractor. Many of my friends in the trade said they don't bother with all that employee stuff, and they just pay their help as contractors, so they don't have to worry about all of those extra taxes and insurance. I spoke to my insurance guy, and he said I would need workers' comp insurance and that it would be pretty expensive in my line of work, so I'd like to avoid that. I think I read about some new rules or something that said, you have to make sure you do this right. I'm a very good carpenter, but when it comes to this stuff, I am at a loss. I hope you can help me and others who are out here just trying to make a buck.
Hey friends, do you ever wonder if you're correctly classified as an employee or independent contractor? Well, today on the Ask Ralph show, we're going to dive into the details of the Fair Labor Standards Act final rule on employee classification. Now that sounds like a mouthful, but it's something that all business owners and even individuals need to know about. So get ready to understand the factors that determine whether you're an employee entitled to minimum wage, overtime pay, and other protections, or if you're an independent contractor who's self-employed. This is crucial information for both workers and businesses. So stay tuned as we unpack it together. Now let's get started.
Welcome to the Ask Ralph podcast, where listening to an experienced financial professional with over 30 years of experience can help you make sense of confusing questions, current headlines, and industry trends about taxes, small business, financial decision-making, investment strategies, and even the art of proper budgeting. Ask Ralph makes the complex simple by sharing his real-world knowledge from a Christian perspective with all things financial. Now here's your host, Ralph Estep Jr.
Welcome back to the show. Today we're diving into the new independent contractor rules which take effect on March 11, 2024. So this is something you really need to be aware of right away. Before I get started, don't forget to subscribe to the show and join our email list. You can do that at AskRalphPodcast.com. You don't want to miss tomorrow's show when we discuss healing your finances. Our Sunday shows are always a little more spiritual, and tomorrow we're going to talk about healing your finances. So let's get started on today's topic. The Fair Labor Standards Act, or it's commonly called FLSA for short, is the federal law, and that federal law sets minimum wage, overtime, and other standards intended to protect workers. That's the whole goal of it. But it only applies to employees, not independent contractors. Now, that might seem like a contradiction, but let me continue. With so many people working in the gig economy, properly classifying workers has become more complex. If you are aware of, Uber, DoorDash, all those kind of things in the gig economy have made this more complicated. So, in 2020, the Department of Labor issued its final rule. And what did they say? They clarified the test to determine whether a worker is an employee under the FLSA or an independent contractor. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And this impacts anybody who's in business or people who are looking to work for a business. This final rule uses what's called an economic reality test. And what it does is evaluates the economic dependence between a worker and a potential employee. That's its core. So at its core, the test analyzes whether, as a matter of economic reality, a worker is dependent on an employer for work or is truly operating their own independent business. Now, the final rule identifies 6 factors that shed light on the economic relationships and guide the classification analysis. Now, that said, what the FLSA has said is no single factor determines the outcome, but based on the overall balance, a determination can be made. And we'll talk about some examples later in the show. So let's get into these factors. The first factor is opportunity for profit or loss depending on managerial skill. This factor favors employee status if the worker does not control important aspects of the work that affect their earnings. For example, if the potential employer sets the rate of pay per job, and the worker doesn't negotiate rates or solicit additional business. So if you are a person that is told to show up to work from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., you're told you're going to be paid a certain wage, then you're probably not going to pass this first factor. However, if the worker exercises business-like initiative to increase profits, such as marketing services or making cost-reducing choices, that indicates independent contractor status. Let's move on to factor number 2. The second factor considers the relative investments of the worker and the potential employer. Large capital investments by the worker, like purchasing equipment, renting office space that allows them to operate independently, suggest independent contractor status. In contrast, Limited investments by the worker indicate economic dependence on the potential employer. So think about that. If you hire somebody to come and work in your office, you're going to provide them with a place to work. They're not renting space. You're going to provide them with a telephone, computer, probably office supplies. So that more or less looks like an employee relationship, not an investment, not an independent contractor status. Let's move on to factor 3. Factor 3 evaluates the permanence and exclusivity of the working relationship. Sporadic or non-exclusive work arrangements point to independent contractor status, while indefinite, continuous, or exclusive relationships suggest the worker is an employee. Let's use our same example. If I hire a person to work at my front desk, well, they're going to show up every day. The thought process is this is going to be a long-term employment situation. However, let's say that I hire someone to come in and fix a plumbing repair. Well, that obviously is sporadic. That's not going to be every day. I hope I'm not having plumbing repairs every day. So let's move on to the fourth factor. The fourth factor looks at the nature and degree of control exercised by the potential employer over the worker. Control over the hours, location, and standards for work generally indicate employee status. Yet control arising from complying with government regulations does not necessarily evidence employee status. So think about that one in our same example. You're going to tell this person what time they're going to work, what time they're going to start. You're going to tell them where to report. And you're going to tell them what your expectations are as to the standards of their work. So let's move on to factor number 5. Factor number 5 considers whether the work is integral to the potential employer's business. If the services are a critical part of the potential employer's operation, this leans towards employee status. But if the work is ancillary to the business, this suggests independent contractor status. Using our same example, if I hire a front office person, that's absolutely critical to the success of my business. People are going to judge your business in the first 30 seconds of when they come in the door. So that person is definitely a critical part. So it leans more towards being an employee. However, like we talked about in our other example, if I have a plumber that comes in, now that might be critical for that day because maybe we got a toilet backed up or a sink that's overflowing all over the floor, but it's not a critical part of the business. So let's move on to the last factor, and that's factor number 6. Factor number 6 examines skills and initiative. If the worker uses specialized skills in a way that demonstrate business initiative, like to generate additional business, that indicates independent contractor status. So using our same example, if I hire someone to come in and work every day, they may not have specialized skills. But let's say I hired somebody to come in to help me with my marketing plan. That could be a specialized skill. They come in to work for a sporadic time. They come in occasionally to work on a marketing plan for me. So beyond these 6 factors, other relevant indicators of economic dependence may also be considered in the analysis. Now, some of this is legal speak. This is the FLSA telling you what to do. The overall determination depends on the economic reality, not the label applied to the relationship. And that's the key. See, a lot of people, like this guy mentioned in the call he sent over to us, a lot of people just say, well, Ralph, I'm just going to call them independent contractors. Well, of course you're going to do that. It's to your benefit economically. You're not going to have to cover them with workers' comp insurance. You're not going to have to pay matching Social Security and Medicare tax. But just because you label somebody that, and listen, I deal with this every day. I have a new client come in and they'll say, Ralph, here's my profit and loss for last year. Can you do my taxes? And I'm looking through this and I see independent contractors. And I see this huge number under there. And I say to them, okay, well, did you give these people 1099s? Oh, yeah, somebody mentioned that, but I just really didn't get around to it. I said, well, tell me what these people do. Well, they work for my business every day. I'm a carpenter, like this guy. Carpenter, I'm out there banging, nails into the wood, cutting wood. I said, okay, well, do these people have their own tools and equipment? Well, no, Ralph, I provide all that. Okay, do they set their own hours? Well, of course not, Ralph. I tell them to get there at 8 and we leave at 4. Do they have their own license and insurance? Well, no, they can't afford their own license and insurance. So the economic reality in that case is these people are not independent contractors, they're employees. So let's talk about some examples that help illustrate these factors. Here's the first one. A plumber who works full-time for a plumbing company is assigned jobs by a supervisor, uses the company's tools, and is prohibited from taking outside jobs as likely an employee based on control, permanence, lack of investment, etc. Pretty clear. That's what we talked about. The plumber that comes into my business to fix the toilet or fix the sink, while that's not a thing it's very important, but it's definitely that person is a subcontractor to me, but from the plumber standpoint, they're an employee of the plumbing company. Let's look at another example. A graphic designer who works for multiple design firms sets their own hours and rates per project, invests in software and equipment for their home office, and actively advertises services, likely qualifies as an independent contractor based on initiative, control, lack of permanence, and the investment made. It's a pretty clear-cut situation like we talked about. The example that I gave was the marketing person. They're buying their own equipment and software. They're setting their own rates. They're putting in their own hours. Let's move on to another example, and that's a cake decorator. A cake decorator who works regular hours at a bakery, uses the store's kitchen supplies, and cannot accept outside cake orders would lean towards an employee status based on exclusivity of work and lack of independence, of course. If you work at a bakery, you're not bringing your own oven, you're not bringing your own mixers and all that sort of thing. You're an employee. It's pretty cut and dry. How about this one? A freelance writer who pitches articles to various publishers, negotiates rates per piece, works when and where they choose, and relies on their own laptop and expertise, is exhibiting contractor characteristics like initiative, control, and skill. Again, this is a freelance person. They're setting their own timeframes. They're negotiating their own prices and rates. And finally, let's take a look at this one. And this is directly what we talked about earlier that the caller was asking about. A construction worker who provides services full-time at a job site using the general contractor's tools and materials and does not set schedules or negotiate pay is most likely an employee. They lack independence and control. So to sum this up, the determination depends on the totality of circumstances. You can't just look at one thing. I hope these real-world examples give you a good sense of how the factors are applied and weighed in practice, so you can assess whether a worker is truly in business for themselves or dependent on an employer. If you have further questions, let me know if you need any clarification. I can walk you through additional examples. You can visit me at askralpodcast.com/store, and you can schedule a consultation with me. So why does all this matter? Why do worker classifications matter? Well, here's the deal. Employees receive protections under federal and state employment laws that independent contractors do not. What are those things, Ralph? Well, as employees, workers are entitled to minimum wage, overtime premium pay, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation insurance, paid leave, and non-discrimination and retaliation protections. On the other hand, independent contractors, self-employed business owners who do not receive these same protections. Why is this important? Misclassifying employees as independent contractors also hurts employers. Well, why is that, Ralph? Well, it deprives state and federal authorities of payroll taxes and unemployment insurance contributions. Now, I think one could argue whether that's hurting employers, certainly hurting their bank account if they don't have to pay for these things, but you have to do it right. Misclassification exposes businesses to lawsuits for denying workers their proper rights and protections, and I think that is the key. You're going to set yourself up for a potential lawsuit if you don't do this correctly. And I hadn't even got into the old discussion about insurance and liability. So the stakes are high. You've got to examine your own situations carefully in light of these economic reality factors. Pay attention to how much control you have over your work and opportunities for profit compared to the businesses benefiting from your services. And again, seek out additional guidance if you're unsure of your employment status. Proper classification provides security for both businesses and workers. Now, before we wrap up today, I want to remind all of our listeners to visit our podcast page. That's at askralphpodcast.com. There you can leave a review. You can share your thoughts like this person did today. I love getting these messages. It lets me answer questions that are relevant to our listeners. That's where we get our questions for future episodes. While you're there, make sure you join our email list. We're trying to grow that so we can let you know about things coming up on this show. And as a way to do that, we're offering a $25 weekly Amazon gift card drawing. So if you don't have your email there, you're not going to win. So tell other people about it as well. And like I said, you can schedule a consultation with me there as well if you wish, and we can talk about your specific circumstances. So to recap, the first factor evaluates opportunities for profit or loss based on the worker's managerial skills. More business-like initiative indicates independent contractor status. The second factor examines investments made by the worker versus the employer. Significant investments by the worker suggest independent contractor status. Factor 3 looks at the permanence and exclusivity of the work relationship. Sporadic or not exclusive work points to independent contractor status. We talked about this. The fourth factor considers the employer's control over the worker. More control indicates that they're an employee. Factor 5 assess whether the work is integral to the employer's business, and I think honest people could disagree about that. But critical work suggests employee status. And finally, Factor 6 looks at the worker's skill and initiative in generating business. Specialized skills used with business initiative indicate independent contractor status. The multi-factor economic realities test determines whether a worker is truly in business for themselves or dependent on an employer. And again, proper classification provides protections for both workers and businesses. So in closing, I hope this overview gave you a better grasp of the multi-factor economic reality test, and that's a lot of words. But it's important that we do this to determine whether a worker qualifies as an employee and therefore will be subject to the FLSA or is truly an independent contractor. You can get educated on the FLSA final rule. You can go to their website. And again, visit our website if you want more information about this and other business topics. We have over 300 episodes out there for you to download and listen to. And make sure you like us on all those social platforms and subscribe to our show. And remember, I always end the show like this. Stay financially savvy, learn, be aware of what's going on, and God bless you.
Thank you for joining us on the Ask Ralph podcast. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. And remember, financial issues don't have to be complicated. Just ask Ralph. The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media, Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.